So sort of we need to talk about sort of how we're going to do upgrades. And in general, and there's a really long session at the last developer design forum we talked about this. But essentially, upgrades have to do with sort of three things. One of them is just like code upgrades, which is like changing the actual artifacts, right? So you have old ones. Two is basically configuration upgrade, which is basically how do you this is like all the XML files from the config subsystem. At least that was the way it was. And then the last part is sort of data, which is stuff stored in the MD-SAL. And I think this is more or less everything. It's not quite. There's sort of akka. There's like akka configuration files and a few other things. But to a first approximation, this is sort of the three hard problems of what you need to do in an upgrade. Oh, if you have to upgrade Carafe as part of it?
That's a slightly different.
Colin, the upgrades have to be kind of tied into the HA redundancy models. And there's basically two of them. There's a cold redundancy, and there's where you have active standby or active on multiple standbys. And then you have active, and that's then, maybe where number 3 and stuff like that comes into. So those 3 points that you application redundancy models. Now, also, in terms of upgrades, we need to figure out or kind of determine at the beginning what is the granularity of an upgrade. I mean, do we want to patch something inside of JVM, or is the upgrade just basically at the node level? I would strongly suggest that at the very beginning we just do node level upgrades. I mean, that's how it works really nicely with cluster. And I'd rather address the dynamic cluster problem rather than trying to do patches inside of a JVM. It's going to be just exploding the problem space and the complexity of the problem.
Yeah,
There's a mic over here.
at the last. Yeah, that was something that we discussed at the lab. Remember, Colin?
Yeah.
You weren't at the one in. I don't think you were there.
So yeah,
but that was basically. I think the overwhelming decision consensus is what you were saying is don't try to do in-place upgrades of artifacts, right?
Right.
Just I'm sorry, in-service upgrade. I meant in-service. Do in-place upgrades.
So if we do the node stuff, and if we start actually with the projects that you guys have proposed with, I get the data out of the system, I munch it offline, and then I load it into a new system. That's an excellent start.
For number 3.
Yeah, for number 3.
Data migration, yeah.
Because the other ones you don't need that. I mean, if your data is backwards compatible with your code, your new code, I mean, it's fine. I mean, you just bring down the old node, bring up a new node, and life is good.
Yeah, and so I think that there's a couple of just to be clear, I mean. So what Jan and Tom P have been saying is really, really good, which is what do you mean by upgrade? What are you upgrading? What's the property that you want of the upgrade? How long does it take? Is it user visible? Is it right? And so right. The ideal world I think you want to get to is I think pretty much what Jan expressed, which is that you have a 3-node cluster and basically, or maybe you have a 4 or 5-node cluster. I mean, 5 nodes is really nice because it means you can have one for maintenance and one for fault tolerance. You can upgrade one, bring it down, have it be down, not have it affect you, upgrade it, bring it back up, and then iteratively work through the cluster. In practice, that's the only way I've seen production things upgraded without losing downtime. This whole idea of in-service software update where you update like the single address space and sort of hope it stays running, I've never seen a customer that believes it.
That is really hard. If we can eventually expand that, kind of put in a roadmap or vision or what have you, it's like you have a 3-node cluster, and during the upgrade you expand it to a 5-node cluster or something like that, and then you bring it down to. But that's the dynamic cluster, which kind of
I think in the short run,
at some point, once we start running things active and load sharing more than just basically active standby, then that would be a time when to start doing upgrades this way. But we need to crawl before we walk. So, the static clusters, the static cluster configurations, and cold HA would be like the first step. And, we put in at least the kind of basics for cold HA in Boron with the singleton service and the singleton application. So
We do have add remove servers too. Moise and I worked on that.
add remove service.
servers.
Servers.
And replicas, shard replicas.
So you can
Yeah.
There are RPCs to do that. There's part
I
of
don't, I don't
RAF.
think we addressed that problem. I mean, but between the two, that kind of contributes to a complete solution.
But you
That
talk
would
about
be
the
good.
dynamically adding servers and removing
Yeah.
servers.
Yeah,
We
yeah,
do
yeah,
have
yeah.
RPCs to do
Yeah.
that now. Yeah.
so the
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, I was actually going to say, like, right now, the problem is that upgrades involve, there is no upgrade process, right? I mean, like, if a Yang model changes, like, literally, there is no process, there's no description. We actually just had a project submitted, which was the data import-export project, which at least gives you the hooks that you, like, before, literally, like, unless you're going to go parse a level DB file, there was literally no way to even think about doing data upgrades. And so we've added a service to basically let you easily extract and put data back in, so you at least migrate it for models, but you have to do the migration yourself. And I think that's sort of...
Are you guys also proposing the tools that are going to be munching the files, or is that left to the user?
Currently, the plan is to contribute a framework, and basically I think the migrations themselves are supposed to be left to application developers. And I think that's the only sane way to do it in the long run, which is you would ask, and this is actually, I think the right... mean-
Yes and no. I mean, you can create a framework. You can create an archetype for
Yes.
something that will be doing the
So what I'd really like-
upgrades,
what I'd really
or
like
the,
to see us-
the migration
What I'd really
functions.
like to see us do, and I think that you're pretty much spot on, is what I'd like to see us do is contribute, like, so what I'd love to see us do in Carbon is contribute a framework which basically, call it a Maven archetype, basically lets you basically say, here's a Yang model, give me a magical function, which is basically a bundle that will be loaded that gets to see both the old thing and the new thing, and can basically take in old things and produce new things, right? It's just one function.
I would actually encourage you to look at, I think there is an open source project coming from Cisco. It's not part of OpenDaylight, but they have a GUI tool where you can take one Yang model and another Yang model and kind of, do the mappings in a kind of GUI fashion, and generates code, it can generate Python, I think can generate Java, and can really help translate one version of a model to another version of a model. If we can use this open source project as maybe as an archetype and a tool, an offline tool for developers and users to do the upgrades of the models, that would be a great use of that. I don't have the pointer where it is, but I can retrieve that, and it would be a great use of the tool.
That sounds pretty.
So I mean, but I think okay. So I'm trying to sort of there's a whole lot of context here that I think we've gone through, but actually there are two things I wanted to cover. One of them is sort of, I think I was going to talk about this, which is I think this part, the actual code upgrade, is pretty straightforward, right? I mean, like, you delete the old artifacts, you install the new artifacts. You need to make sure that the data they're going to read is different. So I think that we pretty much understand what to do.
And you wipe out the data cache.
Yeah.
And assuming you got your features boot set up, you're all
Yeah,
set.
yeah. And so and then the next thing is sort of configuration upgrades. And so we've made this possible in Boron for a bunch of things, not everything, but essentially we had a problem in the past where it is that the configuration files we had in OpenDaylight contained both code wiring information, which needed to change when you upgraded, and user configuration, which you needed to not overwrite when you upgraded. And so we've teased those two apart in most projects. So we now have two different places to do it. So you still need to do the upgrade, which is if there's something that needs to change about the configuration file, you still need to change it. But it's at least now something which you can go either blow away or edit without having to worry about screwing up code wiring. This last part is the hardest part, which is sort of how do you do code upgrades, especially when Yang models change. I mean, but this is, first of all, it's pretty easy to, I wrote a one-line bash script that did this, but there's a thing which basically takes in 2 Git caches and tells you all of the Yang files in your thing that were added, removed, or changed, and gives you the diff, not a Yang diff, but just like a straight-up diff. I mean, it's a one-line bash script. It's not that hard to do, or I mean, they make like 8 lines to only find Yang files and 2 Git hashes. But it sort of tells you what's changed, and basically that way you would know what you needed to think about upgrading in terms of data. If the Yang file didn't change, nothing needs to be fixed. If the Yang file did change, then you can use something like what Jan is talking about to produce some little snippet of code. And you need some meta script that basically runs over all of these little translators. And
MetaScript can be produced itself by a tool, either
yes.
or something. So let's explore that possibility. Maybe add it to the scope of the project that you guys are doing. That would be awesome.
So we can. So I mean, I think at the end of the day, you really want some meta script that runs when you do an upgrade. Basically, when you do like upgrade, update OpenDaylight, and basically what it does is it goes and it looks for an inventory of sort of little translators, pulls little translators up, and runs all of them against the models that are relevant.
Yeah, offline.
Or offline or online. I don't think it's offline's probably easier. There's a couple of issues with offline. So okay, the obvious issue with offline is that the offline format that you'd really like to store it in would be JSON. But it is not true that if you take a Yang model data and convert it to JSON and read it back in, that it will be the same. That is not a property which Yang and JSON encoded Yang provides. And so that's frustrating.
I have one pointer in case you guys haven't seen this. This kind of problem, schema migration, has been addressed by 2 very popular frameworks in the RDBMS space. Just as a pointer, I obviously understand Yang is different, but there's a thing called Liquibase and a thing called Flyway, which solves this, and they're very, very popular. They're used by millions of projects. So the classical Java Spring Enterprise framework use either one of these very widely. And perhaps just looking at their APIs could be an inspiration. Flyway and Liquibase. They're sort of de facto standards to solve this problem for RDBMSs. On the actual approach and APIs, I think tools would be cool and graphical tools would be cool, but they should be building on top of a very simple migration API. So some OpenDaylight API for live migration that would be sort of give me the objects before, give me the objects afterwards, and then build on top of that tools. The problem is if you start to model a model transformation, which is what this is, right? It's a transformation of a previous version to a new version of a model. If you try to model that before you open a general hook that allows you to just do anything, then you run into problems if your model-to-model transformation is not straightforward. So I think the starting point should be to not think too much about scripts and tools and everything like this, but a very, very open API.
I actually think like maintaining 2 versions of a model inside of OpenDaylight is going to be not that trivial. So that's why I would actually, for starters, advocate really the offline tools to the model-to-model translation.
I mean, among other things, writing Java code. So go ahead.
Well, what if your transformation needs access to other data or something like this? You need to look something up to map something to something else. So online is easier. Right.
And just
if you take a dump of the data store with all the models and all that stuff.
But then you need tools that do that for end users.
Yeah, and just as one example of it is a pain to do.
We did that, but it's a non-trivial problem.
So Java actually makes this a pain in the ass because you can only have one imported thing of a given name without using the fully qualified class name. If you're using the generated Java code from 2 different Yang models, you end up with like one of them is like, and anyway, this is a purely cosmetic thing, but it matters. One of them is like, org OpenDaylight, com generated Yang v2, and you have to type that every single time. We had this problem actually. We had like 4 different things called node.
Yeah.
And like
into code maintenance and versions how.
So it's not, it's a trivial thing, but I mean, I agree, there are reasons why I don't see this as a really offline versus online. I mean, the advantage of offline is that you don't have to have this weird like maintenance mode the controller needs to enter, where like the data is all there, but it's all inactive. That's sort of, although you kind of do need that for data export import because you need the controller to quiesce in order to pull it out and to put it in. So like it's not clear that there's a huge advantage either way.
I see what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. I understand the point about the Java APIs. I would, from an operational perspective, think that an online mode is easier because it does it sort of transparently. Otherwise, you need to build tools. People have to be aware of them. there's trade-offs.
Yeah, but what about data change listeners?
No, this would need to run in some special mode. This need to
Yeah, I mean, you need. I mean,
Well,
like, I
what
think,
do you do for data? Do you have to
You don't.
reinitialize your? Huh?
Just don't. Just to have a very special startup mode, migrate, check the version. There's a new version. Move over and don't run anything else. That kind of thing.
Well, the way
whole community to just develop that very special mode for 1 or 2 releases to get it to a point where it's
I mean,
seriously. I mean, it's yeah.
I don't. I think getting the maintenance mode. I mean, the maintenance mode just needs to bring up the MDSAL data store and all Yang models, and nothing else. And I understand that's non-trivial. Like enumerating all the Yang models you need to pull in is actually the hard part. Because and it's not even necessarily known a priori. Like you can, because the control, you know what the Yang models were when the controller was running last, but you don't act. But somebody could type feature install and do something, and which case you pull in a new Yang model, and like you wouldn't, and so like you can't do it for everything. But I think building this maintenance mode is not as hard as you would think. We can, and I think you need it either way, which is like even if you're just doing data import export offline, you need to somehow get the controller into a quiescent state in order to do the export. Otherwise, you don't know that you have a good export.
well the database restore that we have currently in
Yeah.
there is what you do is you take the backup file in it that there's a what's it RPC that does it, and you throw it into a well-known directory, and when the shards are coming up. Before they go into the ready state, during recovery, they then will read if that file, they'll read it, and then they'll apply the data. So before any client can get in and do a transaction or attach a listener, we've, restored the data. It's sort of that hook point that, where it's in a quiescent state at that point, or it's in a startup, so.
And I will email out all these notes too. So like I don't know where I'll send them, but they'll be published. The other thing which I wanted to add, and we went through this pretty quickly, which is like actually my intuition is that if we delivered the property that like the downtime of an upgrade was like 30 minutes, I think that everybody would be happy with us. Like even if it was 2 hours, I think it would sort of be what we need something that's automated. If you got automated upgrade to work, you don't need it to be hitless right now.
There's a couple things of that. I mean, and you have to differentiate between the operational data and the config data. You can easily go down for 30 minutes or whatever for just the config data because you just stop the configurations and everything's fine. If you want to upgrade the operational data, that's a completely different thing, right? That's where actually hot standby becomes a lot more difficult because you've got actives of a previous version, standbys of a new version, and you've got to do kind of live, what Michael was talking, live to live translation. So, but the thing is, if you take your sweet time on changing the config data offline, then you bring up the new node with the new config data, but you bring up cold, then you fail over to that. It learns the new things. There is a little bit of outage. It's still better than what we've got today.
And I was actually proposing I think something even more extreme than that, which is to say like take the entire cluster down, and upgrade it. Which is like, right, and that's not where we want to be in the long run, but as a walk before we run kind of thing, right now to upgrade OpenDaylight, it's a week effort. It's not right. I mean, it's not. I mean, like you literally, it's.
You throw it away, it's not again.
Yeah, basically, it's not an upgrade. It is. There is no continuity. You have you have a tiger and you have a banana, and like you eventually replace the tiger with a banana. There's no like trying to push things through. And so moving to the point where literally you could have any kind of automated upgrade, even if it involved taking the controller down for a couple of hours, would be a huge improvement. And we can figure out how to automate that in a way that we can actually then get hitless upgrades over time. But I would say trying to do hitless upgrades of any kind right now seems like, let's do the thing that. Let's walk.
And I think we did that in Boron with the switch over to Blueprint.
No, because if you change
number one, number two.
We haven't done number 3, so the problem is okay.
No,
So
I know number 3, but we've handled 1 and 2.
yeah, no, 1 and
much.
2. So there's 3 things you have to do. You have to basically lay out. You have to take down the old controller. You have to create a new controller. You have to enumerate all of the configuration files which need to be migrated. Do any transformations on those config files that need to be done, which I don't think we know how to either enumerate them or how to do the transformations yet. Then you have
Config
to
system files.
Yeah,
talking
no,
about
yeah,
the
yeah, but
config
like, well, like, so like, say you need to, I mean, like, if you add a new configuration knob that's mandatory but has like a default value or something like that, like if something about the configuration you're expecting changes, you need to somehow allow people to specify that. Or if like a value is no longer legal, like you're eliminating a configuration knob from a service, like you need a way to remove that configuration knob from the config files that you had before, or something, right? You need some way, eventually you will need to make changes to config files, and you need some way to do that with a hook. Similarly, if you changed a Yang model, you need a way to modify the existing data so that way it's compatible with a new Yang model. And so like that's the part which I think is, we don't
We're
have.
moving away from config files, right? So I mean, some
Well,
people,
you're still gonna have some configuration that sits somewhere, right? I mean, the whole
the
plan
code
is,
wiring is in the bundle, so that gets upgraded.
but there are some
We're moving to the data store.
Sure,
Store
so-
your user configuration for your code in the data store.
I think Tom is saying 2 becomes 3.
Fair enough.
Right, exactly. That's right. I think we've handled 1 and 2.
Can I
But
ask
2
a
becomes
question?
3.
When you mentioned configuration, it's really the configuration in the data store, because we really have to differentiate between the configuration data store and the operational data store, right? And that's where the HA model comes to play, because if you have cold HA, you still upgrade the configuration, but you don't upgrade the operational, right?
And I think, well, and so we provide the option, just to be clear, we provide the option to either, I think you need to upgrade everything, even if you do cold, you have to upgrade everything that's persisted, and there are people that persist their operational store.
It's not operational anymore, it's configuration.
Fair enough. But no, but you're exactly right, but I think the bit to look at is not whether it's configure operational, but whether it's persisted.
It becomes operational for us. I mean, configuration.
Sure, no, I agree 100%. I'm just saying, like, the bit you want to look at is whether or not it's persisted, not necessarily whether it's named config or operational.
So you were
question.
saying except here for number 2. There are a few things, like you talk about the Akka, right? Akka, we already handle upgrade for that. We have the factory Akka file that we always overwrite on a feature reinstall. And that has all the knobs. So basically the one that the user changes under configuration initial is just the stuff that users have to change. Seed node, host name, and the role name. All the rest of the other stuff is
That's
now
not
in
gonna
the
change a lot.
factory.
Yeah.
Yeah, but we only expose the stuff that users have to.
Yeah.
All the other like serializers and how to set up the actors is in the factory one. And so that we always overwrite on a feature reinstall. So I think we're pretty good in that area too. As far I don't know if there's any other configuration file. I can't think of any off the top of my head, but
I have another question, Colin, on the 3 point, the need for this sort of priority for this, more curiosity. I mean, we could, certainly something could be built and could be online or offline or whatever. We could yank that out. Do we have projects who are today blocked or have issues because they have an old schema and they really need to move
Yes.
forward with another one? That's a real pressing need, right?
Yes.
Because I haven't heard that internally.
I mean, so I can personally say that, I don't know. I mean, so I've seen it happen both in OpenDaylight, which is, I mean, you can just do a grep across all of the Yang files and you will find not backward incompatible Yang file changes between versions, which is to say you literally could, like, you could not import the data. That's objectively true. I also know of customers that wanted to change their Yang file. I've had customers that wanted to change their Yang files, which is really, really hard.
And do you have a feeling for the amount of transformation that these things
Very
do?
small.
Like very
It-
small. So people add new required attributes. They don't completely change the
Yeah, no, I mean, it's
structure
not
or-
very often that you completely change, but it's usually something like you changed a string to an enum, or you changed an enum to a string, which actually you wouldn't have to do anything if you export to JSON and back, because this is where it is that like the laxness of the translation from Yang model data to JSON helps you, because a string and an enum are represented the same way, and when they're stored on disk, it's just what the Yang model interprets them as. So like there's other things but there are definitely places where, you know, people have changed something from being a blank to a list of blank. Right, because you need more than one of it, and so like these are the common kinds of changes which are, I mean, it's obvious how to handle them when you look at it, but it's also not zero effort.
So for those kind of almost trivial transformations, if we had a hook with some sort of API, whether offline or online, to be able to automate them would be fun eventually.
Yeah, no, I mean that'd be the really cool part would be to go parse the Yang file and basically suggest the obvious fix. In the short run, my suspicion is that these are trivial enough that you really just want to write a translator that says, like, for every instance of X, please, just do this. And I could imagine actually doing a really, really, really simple DSL where you basically just said, like, old field name, new field name, literally like a .ini file that was like old field name equals new field name, and like that was your script, and you wrote that was your code, and you wrote a compiler which just reads that in and does the translation. For 90% of things, that's probably sufficient.
Yeah, you could automate stuff like in a past project with previous code. We kind of did. We had an XML-driven database migration thing where you could do a simple thing like that, like, write this attribute to this attribute because I renamed it, But the more complicated ones is you take a whole subtree and you move it.
Yeah, I mean, there's
Tell
also
over here. You just can't automate that. I mean,
so I think we're also at time. I actually
Is it the case that the old and new versions of these Yang models?
Well, when we're doing an upgrade, we do, because we actually.
Okay, then you don't necessarily have to have extreme intelligence to parse the Yang models. If you have someone who knows old version, new version, here is the script, essentially, an automatable script. But you don't have to have the super intelligence.
No.
You just have to be able to tell, this is the old version, here's the new version,
And so
here's
I
the
literally
script.
have.
That's exactly right. And what I was trying to say earlier is you can actually have tools that can automate the creation of the script by, having either a GUI or something. The mapping, it's as you pointed out, it's a model-to-model mapping problem.
And if I,
Also, it actually depends what kind of changes there are. Because some of the changes are, as Ron pointed out, I mean, you just kind of get them automatically or automatically. Some of them will be backward compatible, so you add a field here or there.
And actually.
Those are really
tricky ones are going to be things like field renames.
Right.
Yeah, well, there's also really tricky. Well, no, there's like trickier ones are like you restructure like a string that used to encode structure into a structured object. That's the really tricky ones. And then they're not even guaranteed that it will work. Actually, the other problem which I wanted to bring up, and I should probably write down here, is if we use JSON as like the offline method of upgrading, we really have to deal with how do you get back exactly what you wrote in. And I don't know the answer to that. Like, you're gonna have to put like comments on the side of your JSON or something like that you can then read in to get the exact structure back.
on the transformation by code, if that were the way we were going, there are actually people who have done work in this. There's a thing called Dozer, another thing called MapStruct that we might want to look at eventually because they do these kind of things. The Java frameworks for mapping one type of Java structure to another type of Java structure, and these kind of single attribute becomes a list and something becomes mandatory. What do you want to do about it? They have like things for this. You were mentioning before writing in a simple DSL for this, so people have done this kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and so like JSON like loses information about what the types. And actually, you can even the canonical example is like unions, which is like and this is a weird property of how we've done things, but like you can create an object in Java which has a union, which is like the way that Yang is written is like the first listed union, which it matches the requirements, is what it is. So if you say it's either an enum or a string, and enum is first, and it matches the enum, then it will be one of the enum elements. It will be an enum, and it will not be a string. But in Java, because we have the ability to create it, you can actually create a string, which is one of the enum values. And so you write it out to JSON. It was a string when you wrote it out, and when you read it back in from JSON, it will be an enum by definition of how you're supposed to parse Yang data back into a structure. So that you need to fix. I don't know how we fix that.
That seems like a really weird case.
It's gonna kill you. Eventually, you're gonna run into something a really weird bug that you really don't understand. You're gonna be like,
But
what
is
the
that
hell?
bad Yang design to have like unions that conflict like that? Yes.
Perhaps, but it's
I don't-
more subtle than that. I mean, like there are more subtle examples than just that one.
Yeah, probably.
Okay, and I think lunch is now, so I'm not going to get between people on lunch.